The United States of America is being invaded, and the federal government is doing nothing at all to stop it. So the state of Texas has begun to act. Just recently, yesterday, they took possession of Eagle Pass and kicked out the federal government to enforce the border. What is going to happen next? Hello and welcome to Contramundum. I'm Andrew Isker. Here with me is CJ Engel. And joining us today is Josh Abbotoy of American Reformer. Hello, Josh. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to be here. When I saw the news last night and woke up this morning, it felt a little bit like Christmas morning. Those of us who've been following stuff in Texas for a while have been, begging some kind of action like this for some time. The proof will be in the pudding. We'll see how real it is. But all indications so far appear to say that what happened last night at Eagle Pass is new. It's a new development. It's legit, and I'm fired up. So,
excellent.
We're going to get into this. Actually, before we get into like the detailed questions, because you have a piece that you put on. Who published it? I just saw it a couple minutes ago.
American Reformer.
Okay, yeah. I haven't even seen. Yeah, I haven't even read it yet. But I guess the question that I have is why now, and what motivated this out of the blue?
Well, I look at these things from a lawyer's perspective. That's my background. I have to say that this was very favorable terrain to do this on from a legal perspective. There have been rumors coming out, and Abbott said it, that the federal government at Eagle Pass has been removing barricades that Texas has installed in violation of a court order. So that's number one. Number two, it's pretty clear from the reporting coming out last night that this was coordinated with friendlies within the Border Patrol Union. So, he probably has some contacts in Border Patrol on the federal side down there, was able to work this out in a way where he was able to accomplish what he wanted. And all of that's building a record for eventual litigation, which this is all going to be litigated. And what that's going to look like when they go to litigation is there's going to be contemporaneous records of Border Patrol agents thanking Abbott for helping actually enforce our laws. And he's going to have a record of the Biden administration potentially acting in contempt of a court order. So all of that's very nitty gritty tactical reasons why you might do it. Like pulling the camera back. This administration, of course, is incredibly inept and weak. The reporting on the crisis at the border has reached a fever pitch in the last couple of weeks. And then there's the administration's distracted. I mean, we're shoveling billions of dollars overseas and all of these distant wars that we don't have a strong interest nexus in. We just hit Yemen last night. Great time to pull a move like this. And so I mean, those are all just sort of realpolitik considerations for why he might have done it last night. Look, I mean, Abbott through many, the last several years, he's not on the vanguard, shall we say. But the one thing I will say about him is he will get pulled by his electorate if they're really insistent enough. And I suggest that might be what's happening here. And then, on top of that, as he gets a taste of the acclaim that he's receiving for this very minor little step, the optimistic case is that he likes that and he wants to do more of it because he realizes, people are looking to him and relying on him. And that's good. Maybe he trains some muscles that help him do much more things, do many more, braver things down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this seems like, they did it very swiftly. Nobody was talking about it. He didn't threaten it. Nobody really saw it coming. I mean, I could be out of the loop on those, intricacies, but it seemed to me like it was just well planned and well executed.
Yeah, I agree. I had no hint this was coming. I mean, there's been some sort of minor saber rattling from the Abbott administration, but a lot of it. I mean, we've all seen that Abbott is doing these sort of headline grabbing things, like he's shipping migrants to blue cities, which I don't. It grabs headlines. Like, I'm not sure it's all that great of a strategy. But we could argue about that. But that's been the bulk of what he's done up until now. But the thing that he's started doing a little bit is this direct installation of border boundaries, which actually is a significant and sort of new thing. And then, that kind of triggered the feds into like illegally removing
So did he take over as a state? Did he take over local initiatives, or did he actually replace federal responsibility? I mean, I know like the federal government has the ultimate responsibility of protecting the border, but weren't there local police on the border there that he basically used state power to take over? Or it wasn't federal stuff that he took over, it was local, right?
It was both.
Oh, it's both.
Yeah,
Okay.
He's been blocking entry to federal agents in Eagle Pass. And then he also boxed out a city. He has to do that a lot. I mean, right wingers in Texas like it when Abbott infringes on local governments, because usually that's good. Yeah, I mean, we like it when he tries to restore order in Austin and places like that, because they're kind of anarchic under their government.
Well, yeah, because there's a key relationship between like the globalist international interests and localities. I mean, that's what we see in California. I mean, people don't even realize that California just regionally is actually more of a conservative state, but there's been so much great like tactical plays in California so that international globalist federal interests can basically pick off key localities and change the whole state. So it's the same thing that's happening in Texas. That's why Texas is flirting with becoming a blue state. That's why it's struggling. So there are state level, initiatives. That's why like when people talk about locality, it is important for sure, like take over your school boards for sure. But you have to realize that state level is being pigeonholed because key localities are being taken over. I think the left has been much more organized and tactical in the way that it does things.
Yeah. That's totally true. I think that the thing that Texas has going for it, and this has been the case for maybe 10 or 15 years, is that unlike most red states, there's actually like a pretty good, very far right intellectual class in Texas. And, they've been dissatisfied with the Abbott administration in a lot of ways for years, but they're constantly pulling that direction. And they're also aligned with the grassroots that comprises the bulk of the GOP in Texas.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, the ideological drift in Texas it's not immigration driven. It's actually homegrown. It's the kids who are the product of Texas public schools turn into libs. Who would have guessed? But the migration and flight from California is actually helping the politics in Texas, because those people are more conservative on average than the average Texan.
Yeah, no, I can see that for sure. I mean, Andrew, do you want to jump in here? I got so many questions about this, so I'll let you.
My thing is, your article, I thought it was excellent. I put a link in the chat here for everyone to read it, and I hope that you all do. And really, I think the best thing in the article is, you go over the legal aspect of the case between the federal government and the state of Texas and the Arizona precedent and so forth, but your focus isn't so much on the legality, more so the real politique behind it. And especially, one of the points that you bring up that I think people fail to really understand with the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court is not immune to politics. It's not just sitting up above politics and adjudicating things, and it's totally blind to everything else going on. That no, they actually are a very political institution. And you see, I've brought this up several times before that, before the Roberts Court, this was William Rehnquist, Bush versus Gore in 2000, I think, is like the prime example of this, because the state of Florida was going to give the electoral votes to George W. Bush in 2000. And right as the legislature is convening, they issue their ruling, and what do you know what, they stop the recount and all of these things to make it look like the Supreme Court is the one that was going to issue the ruling and end all of it. But they didn't really matter at all. It was the state of Florida that was going to actually make the political move to end the recount. It was just a fig leaf that covered the authority of the Supreme Court. And so you see this all over the place. You see it like within the 2020 election, why they wouldn't take up any of the challenges before the election and after, because they don't want to be involved in a constitutional crisis, which is what you bring up in this article. And so what Abbott is doing with this, and yeah, it's really serendipitous because you wrote this right before the news last night that he did this, and what Abbott is doing is kind of forcing their hand, right? Mm-hmm. You have all of these cities, like San Francisco is the prime example, but even the Twin Cities is this way too, and all the major blue cities in the country are sanctuary cities where they openly violate the federal government's and Congress's laws on immigration, and the government does nothing to oppose them. There's no lawsuits, there's no resources devoted to that. But when Greg Abbott tries to enforce the actual law that Congress has set forth on immigration, they move heaven and earth to stop him, which is just absolutely absurd. So he's forcing their hand in multiple ways. He's forcing the Biden administration and the regime as a whole, and he's forcing their hand. He's forcing the Supreme Court's hand to have to issue some kind of ruling, or just refuse to hear their lawsuit and allow him to do what he wants. And so I guess talk some more about that. I mean, both the aspect of the Supreme Court as a political entity, because you're the lawyer and you know this. You've forgotten more about constitutional law than I'll ever know. So explain that the Supreme Court in terms of the political, and especially as it relates to the issue of immigration.
Yeah, and my story is sort of a realpolitik one. Conservatives have, for the last 30 years or so, really been steeped in originalism. And that's such the approach of originalism is very prescriptivist. It's kind of sitting down, how should judges act in an ideal world, And I even agree, if we have a virtuous republic with a virtuous citizenry where, everything is working, I do want my judges to be originalists. I actually, I buy a lot of the basic argument for it, but we have to sort of fundamentally recognize changed circumstances and all of that. And the other thing we have to say is, looking at the situation descriptively, the Supreme Court doesn't have an army. They don't have any real power. Their power is their legitimacy, the fact that they're perceived by the public and other political actors as being guardians of the Constitution. And so there have been certain occasions throughout history where they have overstepped, where they got involved in something that they should not have been involved with. And not just that, but it was kind of in a way where they overstepped and the people of the country were against them and a lot of the powerful interests were against them, and they got whacked for it. They've been disregarded at some key occasions. A lot of times it's in a time of crisis or emergency, and they make a ruling that gets ignored. On the flip side, look at the when they're at their apex of legitimacy and power, you look at some of the stuff they do and it's shocking. I mean, it's almost tyrannical. In the mid 20th century, you had the Supreme Court, Earl Warren. He's writing rules for what every police officer in the country needs to read to people when they pull them over on the side of the street, like the Miranda warning. I mean, that was Earl Warren writing words that a script for every police officer in the country to use. And, obviously going to every small town across the country, stop praying, at a time when we're 95% Christian. They can get away with stuff like that when their power's at its apex. Roe's a great example of that, and really the last great example of that is Obergefell. And I think we're entering a new time period where all of our other political institutions are totally without legitimacy. And the
Mhm.
Supreme Court is finally like really following suit pretty quickly. And they know that. They're not idiots. And so what that means is they're going to be extremely cautious and thoughtful and protective of their legitimacy. Like that's John Roberts. Like you want to find the decision rule that really explains most of how he rules on things. It's like what will keep the Supreme Court out of a contentious issue. Like
Mhm.
how can we keep our hands as clean as possible if it's politically contentious?
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
that
look at Obamacare, for example. This ruling on that, right?
Mhm.
yeah.
Like I think that's the prime example where it's like they
Mhm.
didn't even follow the constitutional procedure where an appropriations bill has to originate in the House of Representatives, and so it's definitionally unconstitutional. And they're like,
Mhm.
whatever, for that reason, because if they strike it down, he's gonna get his hand caught in the cookie jar.
Well, and
Right?
he's dealing in the first. It's the first term of like a very popular president who had a wave
Mhm.
election. Opposing that guy, shutting down his agenda in his first term is going to be very politically costly.
Mhm.
So that's what's happening in general, and then you get to the immigration issue, and this is where it really starts to become absurd that the Supreme Court would actually want to stick its neck out here.
Mhm.
But this is part of my argument. I mean, Greg, let's be clear. Greg Abbott has not taken all the steps that we want him to take yet.
Mhm.
Like, because I mean, what he did at Eagle Pass last night is great. What I'm calling him to do is signal that you're a legitimate threat to disregard a Supreme Court order. I mean,
Mhm.
this is the Fed posting portion of the podcast. That's a rare and kind of extreme thing to say, but like doing so will
Well, this
significantly increase the likelihood that you win when your case goes up to
Yeah.
the SCOTUS.
this is anti-Fed posting. I mean, this is exactly this is the
Yes.
way that democracy needs to function. Like constitutionally, this is like all the things they say about using your representatives to make changes and not going rogue on your, like all the things they preach at the right. Like this is
Yeah.
exactly set up to say, okay, we're gonna call your bluff on this.
Yeah. Exactly. So
Mhm.
it's anti-Fed because like Fed is like some vigilante nut job doing something crazy. This is a legitimate sovereign, and this is a point you make in the article. Like this a governor and a state is a sovereign, and he has a sovereign duty to his people, and he is going to disregard a federal government that is itself disregarding its duty to its people.
And not only the duty, but the law, as
Yeah,
written. This
yeah,
is completely legally, just like get away from the political theory. Just the way the law is written, completely in Abbott's favor. If he
yeah,
wants to do it, if he wants to do
and
it.
the point about like Scalia's dissent or quasi dissent in the Arizona case is right. If a state is like the original Constitution, if a state is being invaded, right, they can raise a militia and repel the invasion independently of the federal government. And so, if you have 1 million people crossing into your border, whether they have rifles or not, what is that but an invasion, right? I mean, I said at the top of the show, the United States of America is being invaded. I mean, that
Well,
literally,
if
it
people can
literally
walk
is.
through, a capital and it's called an insurrection, I mean, surely millions of people crossing a border
Yeah.
can be called an invasion. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so it is one, and so if that's happening, what is he to do? Like the complete 180, right? Complete antithesis of the like sanctuary city would be if Greg Abbott, right, just set up giant, massive prison camps and put all of them there and said, all right, you're staying here until your court date in 2035, and you get bread and water, right? Like that would be the opposite of it, and say, all right, John Roberts, how many divisions do you have? All right, Joe Biden, send in the 101st Airborne to liberate the illegal immigrants. Like that would be like right if we could be Greg Abbott and like use his power to do that's what anyone on the right would do, or anyone that's voting for him that wants things to be would be like extreme measures to stop this, right? To disincentivize the invasion happening. And so, right, he's not. I mean, I'm not going to get too pie in the sky and think like, okay, like he's going to do those things and take the as extreme a measure. Like set up troops and put in millions of landmines on the border or things like that. But like, he's not going to do those things. As much as CJ would want that, but
hey man, Newsom is listening.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But he's not going to do that stuff. But I mean, even the small, tiny little steps that he's taking, that opposes the federal government is like you said in the article. There is a groundswell of popular support both in Texas and throughout the country for what he is doing, and you have to think. I mean, even despite like Texas has a lot of big money and a lot of corporate interests and a lot of pressure along those lines that want the borders to be wide open. So he's got to balance those things. I mean, he's not immune to any of that too. But like keeping that in mind, the fact that he's even doing this is a huge deal. So,
Josh, do you think this action last night was specifically responding to the announcement of a lawsuit?
No, I don't. Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think that would have been a factor in the broader decision-making process. But I think the real instigator for the action last night was just the fact that the fact that Abbott did it. He's very cautious. The fact that he did it makes it almost certain in my mind that they've got a good record of federal agents removing borders in violation of a court order at Eagle Pass. Mm-hmm. I think that's really what it means. Like it's all in the it's hard to separate these things because it is all in this context of this escalating existential fight in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So, that DOJ lawsuit that was filed, I guess 9 days ago today. So it would have been 8 days ago from last night. So again, don't think it was directly responsive, but as I said in my article, and this is good. We need more of this. If Greg Abbott goes into court and says the legal defense for Texas is a sovereign state. Mm-hmm. And, the right to exclude has always inhered to sovereignty. So, if he goes there with that being his case, and he says, well, yeah, we haven't really lifted a finger. We haven't really done anything. That's the federal government's job. Yeah. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculously contorted and tortured and all of this. Mm-hmm. Part of what I say is if he acts like a sovereign and then he goes to the Supreme Court and argues that he's a sovereign, he's a lot more credible. Mm-hmm. Like what he did last night, hopefully does a lot more of it. That's what a sovereign does. So,
yeah. So my question along these lines too is, some of it is like the legal aspect and how it will play out. Maybe right. The Fifth Circuit rules on it. Maybe they agree with Texas, right? And the Supreme Court doesn't hear it, and that's the end of it, right? Say the Fifth Circuit agrees with Texas. It goes to the Supreme Court, and they take the case, right? Then does the Arizona precedent get revisited? Because you have, like you said in the article, there's a different Supreme Court than it was in 2012. If it gets revisited, what possible changes could be made to that precedent? If it is taken up by the Supreme Court.
I think that all depends on the political calculus in part. The laws at issue are very similar to the laws in Arizona v. U.S. Yeah, I mean, if I was just
talk about that real quick, what happened there and why is it relevant to this?
Arizona v. U.S. This is a case. People may remember during Obama's years in his first term, he was just super negligent about maintaining border security. And then in his second term, he took the negligence up to what I would say is just straight up lawlessness, where he literally made an affirmative policy of deferred action and all of this. In his second term, he did things that in his first term, he said only an emperor could do that. But anyway, so we're talking first term Obama. So we're just talking about him being extremely negligent on the border. Mm-hmm. And Arizona has a somewhat conservative governor and legislature at the time. Jan Brewer's a governor, good legislature. And they pass laws that they make it a state some low-level state felony to be in Arizona as an illegal immigrant. So like, obviously like the federal system already has its own set of penalties and consequences that are purportedly supposed to apply to illegal immigrants. And so Arizona like tacked on state stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why you do that is because the feds aren't detaining anybody. So when you have a state law with a state penalty, state law enforcement can detain people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was mainly that. And then the other thing, they gave a little bit of investigatory power. So like if you suspect somebody of being in the state illegally, you can investigate. And then, of course, if they are, that's now a crime and you can detain. And then they also added a penalty for employers who knowingly employ illegal immigrants, which there's already federal stuff on the books that purportedly penalizes that. So now there's state stuff. So generally, I mean, there were some minor differences and you can quibble, but generally the Arizona scheme like mirrored, the general legislative purpose and intent of the federal scheme. Like when you look at the two bodies of law, it's like, okay, yeah, they're giving out, penalties for being present here illegally, and they're giving out penalties for employers who hire illegals. Like that's the general legislative purpose of our federal immigration law with respect to illegal immigration. Arizona, that. Yeah, right. And so, we can get into the legal weeds if you want to on the mental gymnastics these people did in 2011. But, Justice Kennedy, writing for the majority, Reagan appointee, overturned Arizona's laws and did it on the basis of it's basically this theory that immigration is a subject where if Congress passes a bunch of laws, then they have this complex, comprehensive scheme, and it just belongs to the federal government, and a state they just can't pass a law on that subject matter, full stop.
Yeah.
Like
even if it's identical.
Flicks.
Yeah. Even if it's identical to the federal law and they say, we're actually going to enforce it. Nope, can't do that.
Yeah. Well, and the perversity then becomes like in Arizona, the conflict really was, if there was any conflict of purpose, the conflict was, well, the executive branch, who's tasked with faithfully enforcing the laws, has made a policy of not enforcing them in the way that Arizona wants to. And so there was no like, there wasn't a good argument that the Arizona laws actually conflicted with congressional intent, but rather they conflicted with maybe some delegation from Congress to the executive, and then the executive decides not to do anything. And the Arizona policies, the Arizona laws certainly conflicted with not doing anything. So yeah, I mean, again, Scalia, it's a sneaky dissent, and I want to defend Scalia a lot. But as far as just the normie law analysis, what Scalia does there is he says, no, you guys are getting it wrong. You need to do this very narrow analysis called conflict preemption, where you have to show that a specific law like conflicts with congressional intent on a specific matter. And it has to be a matter that like the federal government sort of has exclusive jurisdiction over. Right. So like he wants the analysis to be much more narrow. But again, I said I want to come back and defend Scalia. Scalia is a judge and he's a lawyer. So he knows, like, he's aware of his limitations in the office that he holds, but he's also not an idiot. And like in this thing, he says things like the federal government is attempting to deprive Arizona of one of the defining characteristics of sovereignty. And I mean, to me, like if Scalia were sitting here, of course, a bunch of necktie guys, they want to argue about like these narrow doctrinal points that come up with that and all the rest. But Scalia knew what he was saying there. Like Scalia would say, well, that's a sovereign being, purportedly deprived of sovereignty. What happens when you try to deprive a sovereign of sovereignty? I mean, and he knew what that meant. And in my piece, I'm trying to sort of call people to really like understand the import of just these very basic concepts that we already have in our political tradition. Like the fact that we have dual sovereignty and that states are sovereigns. Like just like internalize that and actually think about what that means, and think about what our political tradition says in a case like Arizona or today in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like what people are talking about with the Civil Rights Act. I know people are starting to turn against it. Just typical standard like movement conservatives. I don't know what kind of like tricks they have up their sleeve, but it's important to realize that there's this, state sovereignty has been there under the surface, and people have it's been ignored for a century, almost a century. But the arsenal that we have is already legally locked and loaded.
Yeah.
Well, and I would submit, the conservative legal movement has been saying stuff about state sovereignty, 10th Amendment, these sorts of things for maybe about 10 or 20 years. There's a couple problems with our strategy as a movement, both more broadly and then the conservative legal movement. At first, I would say governors have been like, oh, this stuff is great. I'm going to staff up a big solicitor general's office and they're going to go argue about this with lawyers. When, in fact, like the better way to do it is to exercise real sovereignty. And then on the back end, get like the lawyers can go defend it and articulate it and everything. But like there's been an argument for like the formal function without actually like having political leaders who embody it and like act like sovereigns.
This is why the left can so effectively use lawfare, because they're actually doing it.
Yeah. So that's like one piece. The other piece on the state stuff is conservatives are kind of two minds. A lot of our constitutional thinking has been dominated by going to the Supreme Court and asking for vindication of individual rights against particular states. And that we've been doing so much of that it becomes to dominate like how we think about politics. So like just the popular constitutionalism and all of this, like, we're much more used to a scenario where we go to the Supreme Court and ask them to strike down some crazy blue state gun law or something like that. That's like really our gear. That's our best gear that we have.
I'm glad you brought that. I'm really glad you brought that up, because there's like, even in conservative circles, there's this conception that the relationship between the federal government and the people is actually direct from the individual to the Supreme Court or whatever, but it's not supposed to be like that. There's supposed to be like these mediators, and the states play a really key role in mediating between the individual and the federal government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're all, including the conservative legal movement, we're all inhabiting this world that was created in like the 60s, where, you could go and sue your state in federal court because of some claim from the Bill of Rights. And like, that was not the case for most of our nation's history. And it sort of inverts and, it corrupts the relationship between the people, the individual, the state, and the federal government.
What you're talking about there is sort of the corruption of the 14th Amendment and the incorporation movement, right? Yeah. So Josh, like, so moving forward, how does the Arizona lawsuit relate to what's kind of transpire in Texas then?
Well, like, okay, if you went and asked AI, like ChatGPT, apply the rule in Arizona versus US to the facts of the Texas case, ChatGPT would tell you the Texas law is invalid and needs to be thrown out. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like on the face of it, it's basically the same law. Now, here's one. I mean, and what that really means is you've got to go up to the Supreme Court to change it, technically, right? Like the Fifth Circuit is not going to directly say we're overruling Arizona versus United States. They can't do that. There's one, I think the one distinguishing factor that they're going to argue in court is they're going to make a much bigger deal, a much more structured deal about the fact that there's an invasion. Arizona didn't, that was sort of like, I think they made some reference to that, but it was sort of a throwaway argument in the Arizona case. And Abbott's got he's certainly got the facts for it. He can build a record. If he's got sympathetic Border Patrol agents, all the better. So ideally you lean hard into this invasion theory. And then because that's just like straight up an exception to like a supposedly exclusive federal function. If you're it says you can't, like a state cannot make war unless it's invaded. And so the logic is, well, if a state's exempted from the prohibition on making war, which that's a power that's like expressly and exclusively given to the federal government, if they're exempted from that, then surely they must be within their rights if they're dealing with, an immigration invasion, when immigration is not under the express words of the Constitution given to the federal government. And so I think that will be enough of a distinguishing factor that the Fifth Circuit, which is now like it's always been pretty right wing, but really good right wing right now. A lot of good Trump appointees. I think the Fifth Circuit finds a way to save the Texas law, and then from there, it can go up to SCOTUS.
Going up to SCOTUS right before the 2024 elections.
Let's go. Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of the pickle that the Biden administration is in right here.
Right. Yeah. Right. No, it's a very tough situation. And again, like I say, Greg Abbott needs to be sending signals that if they come and strike down Texas law, there will be a constitutional crisis.
Yeah. This is, I mean, what did you call this? The old hickory option.
The old hickory option. Yeah. You got to come up with an option these days. Everybody's got
That's right. Yeah.
CJ doesn't have one yet.
I don't. No. Yeah, I'll get one.
Not for public consumption yet, huh?
The Schmidt option.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're not to decisionist.
There we go. Well. Yeah, I mean, some of it too, like, the timeline for this, I mean, it seems to line up with, like you're right before the election and things like that. But I think I want to look at this, in a broader principle. And you kind of alluded to this a little bit, Josh, with, the fact that, all right, you're forcing this constitutional crisis, and the mode of, conservative activism is kind of forced to change, where it no longer is, like you said, just going and appealing. Like California has some ridiculous gun law, and so they go and pass, and fight against a magazine ban or something like that. It's like individual rights against a state, like you said, but rather, all right, state pursuing the interests of the people over and against the federal government, and then the legal side of it almost is like a fig leaf to the actual action. Right. And viewing it that way, where it's, I mean, we, early on, I think one of the first episodes we did in the podcast, we were I'm coughing over this. We were praising DeSantis, for his action in Florida. Right. Yeah. We're praising it because, and it was good. It was really good, where it's like, here are these states of exception that he is taking advantage of to oppose the federal government and their laws and things like that, and actually acting as a sovereign. And then, like, the post hoc, legal justification, like finding a legal way, to cover yourself after the fact. Like, that's completely the opposite of what conservative elected officials have done for our entire lifetimes. And so, like, this is, like you said, this is a new leaf has been turned, at least I hope, in Republican, conservative executives operating in this mode, where it's like, I don't care what the federal government says. I don't care what the Supreme Court says. I don't care what the law even says. I'm going to do what is right and do what is best for my people.
Well, what the Constitution allows me to do. Like, that's the thing. That's what we have on our side.
Yeah, exactly. It's already set up that way. Right. You just have to force the issue. Like the Constitution at the end of the day, and this is a point we make all the time, it's just a piece of paper, right, on its own. Right. It just is a piece of paper with words on it. It doesn't matter unless there's action, right? Unless it's backed up by somebody using force. And so if Republican governors finally use the force of the state to enforce the law as it is written, right, it's not going to matter. Right. That's why, like, the kind of, normie con, boomer con things, like, oh, look, my Constitution, this is unconstitutional. It's like, nobody cares if you don't force the issue. And so, like, Abbott doing this is forcing the issue, forcing the Supreme Court into a constitutional crisis that it very clearly doesn't want. And I mean, is there going to be more of this? Not just from Abbott, because I mean, from afar, like I'm not in Texas, Josh is. I've always kind of viewed Abbott as pretty weak, actually. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But it seems like he's not the strongest executive. He's not going to until this week, right? It did seem like he's going to poke the feds in the eye, but I mean, there's blood in the water, I think, with the Biden administration, where they're very weak, very vulnerable, and if there's a time to act, now is the time. And I think his administration senses this. So, is there going to be more of this? And if so, where? Right? What other governors are going to say, "All right, time to move, time to enforce, the law of the land"?
Well, I do think there's going to be a lot more of this from Abbott, and we could argue about this. I know there's some skepticism because Abbott's got a mixed record. Conservatives were pretty happy when he won. Was that back in 2010 or 12 as part of the Tea Party wave. And he he did have some early aggressive moves. One of the things, I mean, people often forget, but in this nation, we had this old generation of Republican governors who were basically country club Republicans. Mm-hmm. And then, there was a second wave that really came up in the 2000s, early 2010s, who they were getting more aggressive about building out state capabilities in a very modest way. A lot of them planted these like really good top-notch solicitor general's offices. So like Texas did that. That's where Ted Cruz came from. So I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but that's where he came from. And they were going to the front lines fighting, Obamacare and all of this stuff. And that was like, now like in 2023, we look back on that and that's like, oh, okay, like that's the bare minimum you should be doing. Like, but at the time, even that was sort of unusual. Like,
it was radical.
Governments didn't have good lawyers 20 years ago. They had to hire outside firms, and they were not like aggressively. No conservative state government was aggressively pursuing lawfare, and so they started doing that. And there's a limited good aspect to that, but I would suggest that yes, the next step is these governors acting like sovereigns themselves, not content to outsource their disputes to their solicitor general's office. Like don't hand the file over to the lawyer, like this is your responsibility. You're the governor of a sovereign state. And there's so much pent up acclaim for that kind of behavior. We saw it with DeSantis. I agree, at his best, that's exactly what he was doing. And then, Abbott, I mean, here's what I hope. Like even from last night with this little Eagle Pass thing, I mean, there was so much acclaim, in Texas, nationally, because that's all there and it's pent up. It's just waiting for somebody to step in. Like history is demanding somebody to step in and stop this crisis. And so my hope is it's not really about Abbott at all, but he's the only governor that's situated to be like the man of history for this crisis. And I think history is sort of demanding it. And then it'll probably happen on other issues. I think immigration is the kind of issue it can happen on. And then I think that a lot of this stuff around, minors and like these sexual experiments on minors and grooming, I think that's the kind of thing where it's likely to happen because there's so much pent up anger, betrayal, readiness to stand behind somebody that's going to do the right thing in a courageous way. So I don't know, there's probably other scenarios that could come up that I'm not thinking of, but.
So your advice to Abbott is to call the Biden administration's bluff and say, what? We're not going to stand down. You can sue us. We're going to take this all the way. So in the last 10 minutes, what I'm saying is that like in the last 10 minutes, I want to talk about like, how does this play out? Who's going to fold first here? Or is this going to go all the way? Is this going to become a constitutional crisis? With the Biden administration, do they have it within them to push this beyond where even Abbott probably would want to go?
Yeah. So it's up to the Supreme Court, really, if it becomes a constitutional crisis, because they can take an off ramp.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's likely that they take an off ramp.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but what I'm saying is that like Abbott needs to signal not only that I'm going to fight this all the way up to SCOTUS, but like I may just not obey any federal order.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, and that itself will help to encourage SCOTUS to take the off ramp. But
Mhm.
let's say in the unlikely scenario, SCOTUS doesn't take an off ramp. Okay.
Mhm.
Now the Biden administration has a Supreme Court order saying that the Texas laws are invalid and overturned.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the Abbott administration saying like, no, we're enforcing them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's a constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
And I think the Biden administration tries to find some low impact way to save face in that scenario. Imagine they're spending billions of dollars in some war in some Eastern European country.
Mhm.
And they've got a couple other wars that they're thinking of starting and, the saber rattling about. They can't do a thing on the border because they have no resources. And then all of a sudden they have resources to send the National Guard down to shut down Texas. I mean, that would be, it's extremely unlikely. And if that happens, that would be sort of a tragic ending, but it would also be like, I mean, what I say to Abbott in my article is that would be a type of heroism too, because you would be revealing like the true nature of what we're all dealing with here in a very definitive kind of final way. I mean, that goes right into the history books.
Oh,
you didn't have enough resources to do a thing on the border, but you came in and
I mean,
sent Greg Abbott to jail.
I mean, delegitimization, like if that comes out of this, I mean, that's a step that needs to be taken regardless. I mean, that delegitimizing the federal government like that, it also gives momentum, and it also gives, courage to other, political actors at the local level.
Yes. Yeah. So, but I think that's all very unlikely, because that would be so incredibly painful for not just like Biden, or it would be incredibly painful for like everybody in federal government.
Mm-hmm.
So
it would. And I mean, I think you're right. The likelihood is they would try to save face in some way and just downplay it.
But I mean, that's likely, but like, but these things lead to one another. So the next crisis, things will go a little further. And for, I mean? Like you need to start the domino somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And even, but at the same time, like, I think like the likelihood, like if you have to bet on it, right. I would bet they would de-escalate in some way. Right. And try to save face, especially before an election and so forth. But right. You have to think of like the kind of people that we're dealing with. I mean, you brought up, that particular Eastern European country, and you see what they did there, right? They pushed and pushed and pushed all of that to happen, even though none of it had to. And the likelihood, like they thought, okay, we're gonna like destabilize Russia and cause Putler to be couped and the whole country to collapse so we can loot it, and that didn't happen, right? I mean, it was a very foolhardy like foreign policy decision that they made. And they just aggressively went after it like a dog chasing a car. And so if that's the mentality they have with that, why wouldn't they have it with this too? Right? Where it's just all or nothing. We have to win here, and we are going to show force, and we're not going to give in. If we have to send in the 101st Airborne to Austin, Texas, and to the governor's mansion and roll him into a paddy wagon, right? We will. Right. I mean,
that's how
that possibly happened.
Yeah. I mean,
that's how weak regimes act, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the national security state still depends in a lot of its ranks on normie conservatives and middle of the road political people. And
a lot of Texans.
A lot of Texans.
Yeah.
And they're going to have severe command chain breakdowns if they're doing that here as opposed to Ukraine. So that would be my best argument. It's not necessarily an argument on their competence or rationality, but
feasibility.
They will have a lot of difficulty even just having some of their orders carried out.
I mean, yeah, I mean, let me play devil's advocate on that a little bit. This is good. This is when it gets more exciting when we can argue.
Yeah.
But I mean, you see with 2020 and the things that occurred in 2020. I mean, not just the mostly peaceful summer, but also, right, all of the orders and so forth. Right, all of that stuff's carried out, and nobody said boo. I mean, you have this totalitarian operation happening in the United States, and all the rank and file just went along with it, like almost entirely. So, I mean, same thing with like the mandate in the military, right? The majority of it. I mean, you have very courageous people who said no, not doing that, but that was a minority of people,
and now they're gone,
and they're gone now.
But here's the thing about the military. I mean, when you join and you go to a physical, you've got to get an anthrax vaccine. I mean, your whole life is getting forced to get vaccines in the military far before vaccines became a flashpoint in the pandemic. And the other thing is, I mean, a lot of states learned to be non-compliant pretty quickly in COVID. I think COVID is actually great. I think it's I think like it trashed federal government credibility. And I don't think they can necessarily recover from that. And I just think there's a lot of people in the service who are with us, and they took the COVID shot because, because they
cost benefit analysis.
Yeah. And they've been forced to take, 20 or 30 other shots in their military.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's one more shot? And then, I mean, the other thing, like a lot of there are still a lot of good people who, the best people are probably in that kind of, global war on terror veterans, maybe at year 15 of their service. They don't like where it's going, but they want to hit year 20 before they retire. And they're probably like mid-level commanders. There's still a lot of those guys. And so, I just think it's like, it's just a different bridge. I mean, these are guys who they kind of hate Russia because Russia's always messing with US
They grew up in the 80s and 90s, and they watched, Cold War action movies and stuff. Yeah.
But these are a lot of these guys are guys who are going to look at the prospect of invading Texas, and it's just not going to happen.
Well, let's back up a second. Say it's not sending the military in, because I don't think it would like escalate to that. It would more so be, we're going to swarm the governor's mansion of Texas with 1,000 FBI
well, yeah, it'll probably be proxies. It'll be proxies. I mean, that's how we do everything in Europe.
Yeah, and so like if they did that, right, is Greg Abbott gonna like call in the Texas National Guard and say and like have a standoff with them? Like, I mean, is it gonna, if it got to that point? I don't think he would.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure.
Maybe not. But what I'm saying is like,
are you saying so? He's like Gregory Bukele. Right?
That'd be great if he was.
There's gonna be like FBI agents, like with the covers on and their shirts off, like in rows.
Shades in rows and shackles. Yeah.
We're not gonna get monetized. It's over. It's over.
Yeah, it's done. Well, I look at it this way, where like I think like CJ says, like the behavior of weak regimes. I mean, you see this with all of the arrests of the people at the electoral justice protests, and like they just announced they're gonna start arresting people that were just standing around outside, not breaking any laws, as accessories to the crime. Like they're doing that kind of stuff, which is weak regime behavior. And so if they're doing those kinds of things, why wouldn't they arrest the governor of Texas and try and do that kind of stuff? And so, like, I mean, you bring it up in your article, right? He has to be ready for that, right? He has to be ready for them to do these things to him personally, and you call their bluff, right? At a certain point, like they can't get away with it forever, and. But at the same time, I'm almost of two minds of this, where it's almost like it ultimately, is this battle of wills, where is the will of the regime to not allow any dissent, any departure from their way of doing things, and their rule, is it so strong that if he summons the will to fight it, right? They can't but oppose him and go scorched earth on him and Texas and everything else, right? I think they probably will. And so is he ready? Is he ready for
I don't
that
know
fight?
if he's ready for that. I also think, real quick, and I know Josh's going to jump in here, but I also think before military action, I think they take all sorts of financial action. I mean, every state is dependent in some way on federal government flow of funds.
Yeah.
That would probably precede military stuff.
Yeah, no
Yeah,
Medicare money for Texas anymore. Sorry.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
It might, although there's interesting sort of escalatory things you can do on both sides of that equation if that happens. But yeah, they might. I mean, like, what do they sanction Texas, cut us off the SWIFT system?
Yes.
We have to join the new currency zone with China and Russia.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, like some of those things are in their toolkit, but some of that funding is like, it has like very specific conditions. Like road funding is conditioned on states passing underage drinking laws, right? Like, so they don't. It's not like every federal dollar that comes here has some condition that is like Texas must comply in all respects with the Supreme Court order.
Yeah, but deep politics, there's networks of those flow of funds. Those. I mean, those things can be. There's pressure points.
Yeah. And the escalation. I mean, it isn't only. I mean, our experience has been it's only one-sided, but like they can be two-sided too. So like, if they try to push those things, right? You could. I mean, it seems extreme and crazy, but we're in extreme and crazy times. And if they do, push that kind of nuclear button financially, you could just say, well, no more federal income tax from the state of Texas, right? We're not going to allow you to tax our citizens anymore. Like things like that. I mean, it seems absurd and insane.
White pill. Yeah.
Think that way, but
what
it's
if,
like
what if they stopped giving welfare to Texas and people had to move to get welfare in another state? I mean,
that'd be horrible.
Yeah,
we'll take them. We'll take them.
To be eligible for federal benefits, you've got to leave Texas.
Yeah, we'll take
war of attrition.
Josh, I don't want to. Why don't you finish up with your final comments? I don't want to take. You've been generous with your time too, so I don't want to take all your time. Thank you.
Yeah, guys. I mean, we've beaten this up pretty well. I'm not sure. There's not a lot else to say. I mean, other than really, I want to go back to the beginning and basically say that look, I hope Abbott does this. I don't know, like. I last night was an encouraging sign, but who knows? It's very early. But all the stuff is there in our political tradition to draw on. Like read what our political tradition says about states and their duties to their citizens, and then act like what they say about you. And then that's going to make it all more likely that things work out. And then finally, to Andrew's point, like we don't know the future. Maybe it does turn into this big escalatory conflict and it ends with Abbott, like, getting arrested and, the DOJ arresting him and indicting him and things like that. If that happens, I mean, Abbott will be a consequential figure in history. And, I know, like, I think there was a lot of people who, if in that place and they said, that's the cost, I'll take it. We don't know if he would or not. But what's the alternative? It's like, if you're an inconsequential figure in this just long managed decline, you complained about the crisis, what kind of, is that the legacy you really want?
I think making martyrs is one of the most self-damaging things that the federal government could do right now. Making a martyr out of him. Yeah.
Especially someone like significant, right? Not, I mean, they can make martyrs of, right, that guy in like Utah that posted, crazy stuff on Facebook that the FBI rubbed out, right? They can make martyrs like that, and only people like us care about it. But
because it justifies their, exactly, the crazy people, it justifies their warnings about Nazis in America or whatever. Doing it to Abbott radicalizes, the Main Street.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just.
Main Street doesn't even know about these arcane legal debates. They
Yeah.
just look at the news and they're like, the federal government is removing boundaries that Texas put up. Are you kidding me?
Right.
I mean, like just those like very basic facts, like absurd. And it's not even like the right wing. I mean, we're talking 60% of the country gets angry about that. So
yeah, exactly. Yep. Well, I appreciate your time, Josh. That was fun.
yeah,
Yes,
guys,
good talk.
thanks for having me on.
It's
This
good
is
talk.
fun.
It's gonna things things could go pretty rapidly from here. So it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens here.
All right. Well, I'll try to stay up to date. So if you guys want to talk again, you know where to find me. So
We do.
absolutely. Well,
right.
everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back next week with all sorts of new and exciting stuff. Maybe we will be having some guests. I don't know if CJ has gotten Paul Gottfried yet. We got to get him back on here to discuss the Caldwell book. Maybe that will happen. I'm not going to make any promises. I can't keep, but that's the plan. We'll see if we can pull those strings. But until next time, thank you all. Please like and subscribe and share and get this to everybody. Please buy the Boniface option and read it and buy 15 copies for all your friends. But anything else you want to do? Anything else you want to share, CJ, before we leave? Any articles? Oh, when are we going to hear from We're All Going to Make It? Oh, we ran out of time for We're All Going to Make It. Next time, maybe. We'll see. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, nothing new here. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next time.